Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nathanias here with another Top Terran tip tutorial. We're going to teach you a little bit of Terran versus Zerg. And this is a very special build order that I have discovered through looking through the match history of the European professional Terran player, LiquidBunny. For the purposes of, well, categorizing this build order, we are going to call this the Bunny build. It starts with a very standard 14 supply depot, 16 supply barracks, 16 supply gas. The most normal opening in the game, the Reaper opening. This map is Dusk Towers, a map that works very well for Liberator-based strategies. If anything, people using this build order more and more should get it nerfed. I'll speed through a little bit. What the Zerg player is doing doesn't really matter. We'll go through scouting as their units come out and we look at what we see. For the purposes of educating you properly, I will hide some of the information on the screen and show you what we're going to do. Normally, after the Reaper starts, you want to begin the Reaper. Afterwards, we start our command center and then take our second supply depot. So far, this is exactly as any textbook Reaper expand would work in StarCraft II Legacy of the Void. The difference that comes up now, as we go into what makes this build order so powerful, is the follow-up. We build one Marine after the Reaper comes out, so that the Reaper can go to scout, and one Marine will sit home to either defend or hunt overlords. Your Reaper's primary goal is to see whether the Zerg player has taken their gas and is continuing to mine it, whether they've started Zergling speed, and whether they've taken a third base. This can be tricky on some maps where your opponent has the option to take their natural third, rather than taking their natural, well, second. For the purposes of this build, once your Marine is on the way and your supply depot is close to completing, you'll want to start a factory as soon as you have 100 gas. As we can see here, we've started it next to the barracks so that we can, after the Marine is done, build a reactor. This will allow us to get Hellions, which will stop any early Zergling or Zergling Baneling all in. Once the factory is on the way, you want to immediately start your second refinery. You'll need this gas in order to afford the tech that you'll be using to win this game. Once the Marine is done, you can either rally it outside to try and hunt for one of these overlords your opponent will surely have out on the map, or you can keep it at home to defend. Once the barracks is done building that Marine, you start your reactor and prepare to saturate your second gas. Your natural expand command center will come close to completing. For the purposes of this game, my Reaper goes across the map and does light damage, killing about a drone and maybe a Zergling. As someone who regularly takes risks, I don't do too much scouting myself in this game because I see the third base and I assume that it is his third base. I'm not concerned about any early aggression or cheese because my opponent hasn't shown me anything worth worrying about. Of course, things like those extractors are merely to keep the drones alive. When the factory is done, you want to lift it and move it onto this reactor, moving the barracks closer to your starport. You want to start the starport with the same SCV that finished the factory and immediately start it as soon as you can. When your natural is done, transform it into an orbital command and build another supply depot. Since my main base is saturated on minerals, I don't like to take any workers off of this mineral patch. I'd rather use the one that finished the natural expansion to build this supply depot. You'll need to continue to build at least one depot at a time in order to successfully keep enough supply available to do the build order properly. Once your starport is about halfway done, you'll want to start a tech lab on your barracks. You will be swapping your starport onto this tech lab as soon as it's ready. With the factory and the reactor, you're going to open up with Hellions. If you're feeling worried about a possible Ling aggression or any sort of Zergling Baneling attack, send your Reaper and your Hellions home. Sitting at the high ground of this ramp will allow them to defeat any Zerglings that clump up attempting to breach your ramp. And if Banelings are used to bust through your wall, your Hellions are the only unit in the early game that will allow you a chance to micro against an incoming flood of Speedlings. As your Hellions move across the map, you'll want to apply light pressure, killing any Zerglings that you can, and not running or throwing away your Hellions until you know for sure your opponent is not following up with a very fast Roach Rush. In the event that your opponent is going for a very quick Roach attack to follow up whatever opening they've gone for, when you swap your starport onto the tech lab, you can choose to build a Banshee at the very beginning instead of going straight for Liberators. The Banshee has a very high sustained damage per second versus ground units, and roaches cannot attack them, and Ravager shots are very easy to dodge because Banshees move quite fast. Now, for the purposes of this game, I did not scout a fast roach warren. I did not scout anything that told me I would need to worry about that. So, we'll go straight into Liberators. What gives the cherry on top on this build is as soon as your starport is complete, you'll want to start your fusion core. This is probably the only time you will ever see a real tutorial for StarCraft 2 telling you to build a fusion core in the first 5 minutes of the game. I've used this build to defeat top Korean Grandmasters, as well as pretty much every Zerg I've run into that hasn't caught me off guard. This fusion core is what will allow you to research the upgrade for the Liberators, Advanced Ballistics. This increases the siege range of Liberators so that you can place your siege range from further away than you normally would. This allows you to outrange spore crawlers, most positions where queens can hit you, and in certain cases, you can even outrange where Ravagers can cast their corrosive bile. The barracks and factory are of little consequence this game because I'm not worried about roaches. If I had scouted some sort of fast roach or fast Ravager attack, I could move the barracks back onto the reactor, start a bunker here, and use the factory to build its own tech lab to go into siege tank marine for early game defense while my Liberators move out onto the map and I research advanced ballistics. Like I said, this fusion core starts as soon as your starport is ready. I place it in the back of my natural expansion because it's very difficult for an overlord to get to the back corner of the map. If my supply depot sees an overlord, I can immediately send the marine I have inside of my base over to this position to deny the scout. Oftentimes a Zerg player, if they're not opening Spire, will not have an easy direct counter to an opening such as this. Moving forward, for this game, I keep my Hellions out on the map. I know he hasn't opened with roaches, but the important reason on why I like to keep my forces up front outside my opponent's base rather than at home defending is A, to pick off a few units here and there, but most importantly, if my opponent produces a large swell of Zerglings, either to go for a surprise Baneling attack or any type of Roachling Bane or Roach push, my Reaper will die, and possibly my Hellions, far enough away from my base that I'll have some time to start bunkers and possibly hold on even if I don't scout anything at the start of the game. As the fusion core reaches completion, you'll find yourself with just enough resources to throw down a third command center, as well as start a tech lab or a reactor on your barracks. For this game, I still like to keep my Hellions and Reapers poking and prodding. Liberators are very powerful siege units, and for the purposes of this game, I like to keep the Hellions moving around, distracting my opponent as much as possible so that they do not see the next phase of my build coming. Even if you lose all of your Hellions, which you probably will, and I have as well, it's still okay because you're getting some work done. In this game, because Liberator range is not yet complete, I have to start the upgrade now that the fusion core is done. You can still use your Liberator to play for positioning. In a situation like this where queens are trying to chase my Hellions off creep, I place the liberation zone between the queens and the creep, so that in order for them to run from my Hellions, they must run into the liberation zone. This ensures a free, easy kill on the queens. It's moments like this you can run Hellions by to try to get damage done, but if you're a low-level player just trying to get down the basics of this build order, fancy Hellion micro is not important. You can very easily keep all of your Hellions outside of your opponent's base until you feel comfortable either attacking with them or bringing them home to defend. Now that the Liberators are out on the map, the most natural position to use them is going to be either on ramps, chokes, or, as we're going to do in this game, behind the mineral lines of your opponent. The natural reaction for many Zerg players is going to be to get a very fast Spore Crawler behind their mineral lines to try and block your Liberators from sieging behind them. This is enough to stop a Liberator without the range upgrade. Only without the range upgrade. As Advanced Ballistics is researching and you build up your Liberator count off of this Tech Lab starport, you'll want to start a Tech Lab with your factory so that you can go into that defensive siege tank posturing. This is what prevents counterattacks from killing you. I've defeated many players that have tried to counter this play with mass roach Ravager attacks or any other sort of play simply by having a couple tanks as well as a bunker. If you're trying to decide where to put your tanks to defend in a map like this, locations such as this spot right here, this spot, and this spot are generally going to be good enough to prevent an overlord that comes from the left side, giving vision. A Ravager that wants to shoot its corrosive bile on a tank here is very easy. It's very easy to hit tanks here. Hitting a tank in this position is quite hard, and a siege tank placed between this starport and barracks still has enough range to hit anything that goes at the bottom of that ramp, which is the only area that matters if you're trying to defend a counterattack. Now that the Liberator count is starting to build up, and our opponent has deflected our first Hellion push, we move into Phase 2. The third command center is now an orbital command. We've continued to build supply depots and take additional gas. The follow-up is the least important part of this build order. You could do whatever you want after this. If you want to play mech, take your gases earlier, get factories. If you don't want to follow up with tanks, you can start Widow Mines, keep it on the reactor. The world is your oyster. The most functional important part of this build order is what you do when Advanced Ballistics is done researching. As this upgrade completes, I spread my Liberators out to go to all of my opponent's bases. On Dusk Towers, it's very easy to get into position to block your opponents from being able to mine at all. In the current metagame of StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void, the majority of Zerg players are currently abusing a very fast rush to Hive Tech, where they use Ravagers to stay alive in the early game and pave their way towards a quick Hive to get Ultralisks for an easy victory versus a bio-based composition. This Liberator is very difficult to hit with Ravagers. Your opponent will not be able to shoot Corrosive Bile at this Liberator without stepping into the range of the Liberation Zone. Killing this Liberator will require your opponent to throw away Ravagers, very expensive units, in order to trade against you. I position a Liberator at each mineral line, far away enough that a Spore Crawler cannot hit it. These Queens can also not hit the Liberator without stepping into the Freedom Zone. Of course, a Liberator, 3 shots a Queen, and 2 shots a Ravager. By blocking off these mineral patches, you force your opponent to delay their own income by not having drones there. Looking at the income tab, we can see that despite the fact that we're at very similar worker counts, our opponent has, well, no real income so to speak of. On Dusk Towers, there are a couple of excellent positions you can put a Liberator. This one was a little far out. Eventually I will lose this to Ravagers, but as you can see, it can very easily be moved just a little bit back, and that would allow it to siege a similar number of mineral patches without being vulnerable to Ravager attack. This Liberator will put itself in the very corner of the map. It's quite easy to do, and no unit is going to be able to hit this without taking damage from the Liberator. We've denied our opponent a serious amount of economy, and most importantly, we've forced a very specific reaction that is only doable by delaying Hive. As I've stated before, in the current metagame, delaying things like Hive is the last thing a Zerg wants to do. Most Zergs will not open Spire and will attempt to use Ravagers to counteract this strategy. This is a poor choice, as it will lead to bad trading, and you will usually lose units. As we can see, my opponent still takes a lot of damage on one Ravager and loses another to kill this Liberator after it's already delayed mining for a significant period of time. He still has to move his Ravagers over to hit the other Liberators as well. I continue to inch back just a little bit to hold this position. The follow-up, racks on racks on racks. Double engineering bay as soon as you can afford it. And this is one of those things where you can basically increase an infinite amount of things to follow this build-up with as you progress in skill level at StarCraft 2. The only things you need to know once that Liberation Zone upgrade is on the way for the Liberators is you want to get up to about 9 barracks, pumping out Mass Marine, Stimpack, Combat Shield, and eventually, once you have some Liberators, a follow-up into Medevac Siege Tank. Taking your third base whenever you're comfortable, because hey, your opponent isn't mining much anyway. That being said, at this point, we've successfully concluded the opening build here in this Terran vs. Zerg. Due to requests that you guys have made, I will show you how the rest of this game plays out so I can give you any further tips you may want. Eventually, our opponent does clean up these Liberators using his Ravagers, but at a very high cost. We've killed 16 drones, denied several minutes of mining time, and we've successfully prevented our opponent from rushing to a Hive Tech by forcing him to invest in other areas sooner. Many Zerg players will also try to deal with this using a Spire, which will further delay a Hive Tech, as Mutalisks are not quite good versus Liberators. You can always continue to build Liberators versus any Spire opening, as 6 or 7 Liberators will shut down almost any number of Mutalisks if you keep them by missile turrets or by Marines. I like to delay the gases on my third base so that I can afford more barracks production. As long as I know that I'm not at any threat of a counterattack, I simply get ready, wait for combat shields and stim, and I push out. The delay in my opponent's income has ensured that I will have a much higher army supply than my enemy, and will allow me to basically push right in and completely crush them. I like to take engagements by dropping my tanks up front to force them as a distraction, and then stim all of my marines and stutter step into the Ravagers. This is the best way to avoid corrosive bile. Not by running back, but by running past it. We stutter step, we trade, and basically, because of the slow attack speed of Ravagers, we kill everything. Just kind of stutter stepping around like we're in a circus or something like that. Eventually, our opponent dies a horrible, painful death because their economy has been so grossly limited by our Liberator opening. Have fun and, well, send me some pictures or screenshots on Twitter at Nathanias TV of you drinking some delicious Zerg tears. This has been Nathanias with the Bunny Liberator opening. See you guys next time.